Emma Wilson had always believed that true wealth lay in helping others. The daughter of a pastor and married to Michael, a technology magnate, she dedicated much of her time to social causes. On a gray September morning, she decided to visit a local orphanage in Columbus, Ohio, to donate toys she had collected during a charity drive. It was a routine that had become part of her life, but that day would prove to be unlike any other. Upon arriving at the orphanage, Emma was greeted by Mrs. Anderson, the middle-aged director, with a warm but weary smile. The children ran excitedly through the corridors, eager for the gifts they knew she had brought. Emma smiled at each of them, crouching down to ask their names and what they loved to do. This place was a haven of love for these children, and she took pride in being a part of it. Then, in the midst of the crowd of small, smiling faces, Emma suddenly stopped. Her eyes locked onto a boy playing alone in the corner of the room, holding a small red toy car. He looked to be about 6 years old, with light brown hair and striking green eyes. The shock was immediate and profound. The boy was the spitting image of her husband, Michael. She approached slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might break the strange spell. The boy looked up and met her gaze. For a moment, Emma felt as if she were staring into the eyes of a young Michael. The resemblance was so striking that her heart raced. "Hello, sweetheart. What's your name?" Emma asked, her voice slightly trembling but filled with warmth. "Liam," the boy replied, without much emotion, returning to his play. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The name, the appearance, something wasn't right. She tried to mask her discomfort, but couldn't ignore the question that burned in her mind. "Liam, do you know where your parents are?" The boy shook his head, still focused on his toy. "I don't have parents. Mrs. Anderson said they left me here when I was a baby." Emma's heart ached. She felt a mix of sorrow for the boy and a growing unease within herself. When the visit to the orphanage ended, Emma was visibly disturbed. The image of Liam wouldn't leave her mind. Everything about him, his eyes, the way he furrowed his brow, even the way he held the toy car, reminded her of Michael. She knew she had to find out more about this boy. Back at their mansion, Emma found Michael in his office, engrossed in a virtual meeting. The usual smile she offered her husband was replaced by a serious expression. When Michael finished the meeting and noticed Emma standing there, he smiled, but it faded quickly as he saw her face. "Emma, is everything okay?" he asked, concerned. She hesitated, unsure of how to begin. "Today, I went to the orphanage to deliver the toys, and, Michael, I met a boy there. He looks exactly like you did when you were a child. His name is Liam." Michael frowned, puzzled. "What do you mean, exactly like me?" "I mean, he looks just like you, Michael. It's not just a resemblance. It's as if he were your son." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael seemed stunned, as if the idea was impossible to comprehend. "Emma, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been with anyone else. This boy can't be my son." But Emma wasn't convinced. Doubt had already settled in her heart, and she knew she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. That night was long and restless for Emma. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's face. She knew the resemblance was more than just a coincidence. She needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. The next morning, Emma woke up with a heavy heart. The image of Liam's face, so uncannily similar to Michael's, haunted her thoughts. As she got dressed, her mind raced through the events of the previous day. She knew she couldn't let it go. There was something about Liam that demanded her attention, something she couldn't ignore. Emma made her way downstairs, where Michael was already seated at the kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee and scrolling through the news on his tablet. The sight of him, with his familiar features and expressions, only intensified the unease that had settled in her chest. "Good morning," Michael greeted her, his voice warm and calm, unaware of the storm brewing in Emma's mind. "Morning," Emma replied, forcing a smile. She took a seat across from him, her gaze fixed on the coffee mug in her hands. She knew she needed to approach the subject again. But how? Yesterday's conversation had ended in confusion and denial, and she wasn't sure how Michael would react if she pressed the issue. After a moment of silence, Emma took a deep breath and looked up at her husband. "Michael, about what we talked about yesterday. I can't stop thinking about that boy. Liam. Michael lowered his tablet, his brow furrowing as he met her gaze. Emma, we already talked about this. I told you, I don't have any other children. There's no way that boy is mine. I know what you said, Emma replied, her voice steady but laced with determination. But I just can't shake the feeling that there's something more to this. It's not just that he looks like you. It's everything about him. His mannerisms, the way he speaks, even the way he frowns, Michael. It's as if I'm looking at a younger version of you. Michael sighed, clearly frustrated. Emma, you're imagining things. There has to be some logical explanation for this. Maybe he just happens to look like me, or maybe there's some distant family connection we don't know about. Emma shook her head, unwilling to accept such a simple explanation. I'm not imagining this, Michael. I know what I saw, and I know how I felt when I saw him. Please, just humor me on this. What if there's something we don't know? Something that could explain all of this? Michael stared at her for a long moment, his expression softening as he saw the concern in her eyes. He knew Emma well enough to recognize when something was truly bothering her. Okay, he finally said, his voice gentle. What do you want to do? Emma hesitated for a moment, then spoke the words that had been on her mind since she left the orphanage. I want to do a DNA test, just to be sure. Michael blinked, clearly taken aback by her request. A DNA test? Emma, that's a pretty drastic step. You really think it's necessary? I do, Emma said firmly. I can't just let this go, Michael. I need to know the truth. Michael rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation beginning to sink in. And how do you propose we get a sample from him? From a kid in an orphanage? Emma had thought about this. I'll go back to the orphanage. I'll find a way to get a sample from him, maybe a hair or something. And I'll need a sample from you, too. I know it's a lot to ask, but please, Michael, do this for me. Michael exhaled slowly, then nodded. All right, Emma. If this is what it takes to put your mind at ease, then let's do it. But I want you to know, I don't believe this boy is mine. I've never had any other children. Emma nodded, appreciating his willingness to go along with her plan. But deep down, her instincts told her that something was very wrong, and she wasn't about to ignore that. Later that day, Emma returned to the orphanage under the guise of bringing more donations. Mrs. Anderson welcomed her warmly, unaware of the true reason for her visit. As Emma walked through the familiar halls, she spotted Liam again, playing with the same red toy car. This time, Emma was prepared. She struck up a conversation with Liam, kneeling beside him as he played. She watched him closely, noting every detail, the way his small fingers gripped the car, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the little frown that formed on his lips when something didn't go as planned. Liam, do you like cars? Emma asked gently, trying to engage him in conversation. The boy nodded without looking up. Yeah, they're fast. Emma smiled, but her heart pounded in her chest. She had to do this carefully. Your hair looks so nice today, she said, reaching out to gently brush a strand away from his face. Her fingers trembled slightly as she discreetly pulled a single hair from his head, hoping he wouldn't notice. Liam didn't react, too engrossed in his play to care. Emma quickly pocketed the hair, her heart racing with a mix of guilt and determination. She couldn't believe she was doing this, but she knew it was the only way to find out the truth. By the time she left the orphanage, Emma's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had the hair sample, and now all she needed was Michael's. That night, while Michael slept, she carefully collected a strand of his hair from his pillow, her hands shaking as she did so. The next morning, Emma sent both samples to a private lab, requesting a rush on the results. The waiting would be agonizing, but she had come too far to stop now. As the days passed, Emma's anxiety grew. Every time she saw Michael, she felt a pang of guilt for what she had done, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth needed to be uncovered. Finally, the call from the lab came. The results were ready. With trembling hands, Emma answered the phone. Her breath caught in her throat as she heard the words on the other end of the line. The DNA test confirms a 99.9% match. Liam is biologically related to Michael Wilson. Emma's world crumbled around her. The truth she had been so desperate to find had shattered everything she thought she knew. Now, She had to confront the reality of what this meant for her marriage, her life, and the boy who was more than just a stranger. Emma stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the phone slipping from her grasp and landing on the hardwood floor with a soft thud. The lab's words echoed in her mind, confirming what she had feared. Liam was Michael's son. Her world, once so stable and certain, now felt as if it were crumbling around her. She could hardly breathe as the implications of the revelation settled over her like a suffocating weight. She tried to gather her thoughts, but everything seemed to spiral out of control. How could this be possible? Michael had insisted he didn't know anything about the boy, and she believed him. But the DNA test didn't lie. Liam was his son, which meant there was a part of Michael's past that he either didn't know or wasn't telling her. With trembling hands, Emma picked up the phone and placed it back on the table. Her mind raced through the possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself. Michael needed to know the truth, but how could she confront him without shattering their lives? The sound of the front door opening jolted her from her thoughts. Michael walked in, his face lighting up with a smile when he saw her. "Hey, Em. I thought I'd come home early today. We could spend some time together. How does that sound?" Emma forced a smile, but it felt strained, artificial. She knew she couldn't pretend everything was okay, not after what she had just learned. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's smile faded as he sensed the tension in her voice. He stepped closer, his expression filled with concern. "Emma, what's wrong? You're scaring me." She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she clasped them together. "I got the DNA test results back," she began, her voice quivering with emotion. "Liam, he is your son, Michael." For a moment, Michael just stared at her, the words not fully sinking in. Then, his face paled as the reality of what she had said hit him. "What? No, that's impossible, Emma. I don't have any other children." "The test doesn't lie," Emma said, her voice breaking. "He's yours. I don't know how, but he is. There's something in your past that we don't know about, something that explains all of this." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "No, Emma, I swear I've never been unfaithful to you. There has to be some mistake, some kind of mix-up. I've never even heard of this boy before." "I believe you," Emma replied, her eyes welling with tears. "But that doesn't change the fact that he's your son. We need to figure out what happened." Michael sat down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. "I don't know, Emma. I can't think of any situation where this would be possible. Unless—" Emma's heart skipped a beat as she saw a flicker of realization cross Michael's face. "Unless what, Michael? Please, if there's anything, you have to tell me." Michael looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock. "There was a time, years ago, before we even met. I was young and stupid, involved in some reckless things. I had a brief relationship with someone, but it ended quickly, and I never heard from her again. I didn't think anything came of it." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying, could it be possible that she was pregnant? That she had your child and never told you?" Michael shook his head, disbelief written all over his face. "I don't know, Emma. I honestly don't know. But if that's the case, why would she leave him at an orphanage? Why wouldn't she come to me?" "Maybe something happened to her," Emma suggested, her mind racing to piece together the fragments of the story. "Maybe she couldn't take care of him and thought this was the only option." Michael looked down, his hands trembling. "If that's true, then I have a son out there who's been living without me all these years. And I had no idea. God, Emma, what do we do?" Emma sat down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. She could see the anguish in his eyes, the weight of this revelation pressing down on him. But beneath her own shock and fear, she felt a sense of resolve. "We find out everything we can," Emma said firmly. "We use whatever resources we have to track down his mother, find out what happened, and make things right. If Liam is your son, then he deserves to know you, Michael. We can't just leave him in that orphanage." Michael nodded, his expression still dazed. "You're right. We need to know the truth. But Emma, what if this changes everything? What if we can't go back to the way things were?" Emma squeezed his hand, her voice soft but steady. Things might change, Michael, but we'll face it together, no matter what happens. This is our reality now, and we have to deal with it. The weight of their situation hung heavy in the air as they sat together in silence. The life they had built, the future they had planned. All of it seemed uncertain now. But Emma knew one thing for sure. They couldn't turn their backs on Liam. They couldn't ignore this truth, no matter how painful it was. As the evening shadows lengthened, Emma and Michael began their search for answers. With Michael's resources and connections, they would leave no stone unturned in their quest to find Liam's mother and uncover the story behind his birth. And in the process, they would have to confront their own fears and doubts about the life they thought they knew. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as Emma and Michael launched into their investigation. The quiet, comfortable life they had once known was now replaced by a relentless pursuit of the truth. Emma's determination fueled their efforts, and Michael, though still in shock, knew that they couldn't afford to stop until they had all the answers. They started with the basics. Michael tried to remember everything he could about the woman from his past. Her name, where they had met, the brief time they had spent together. He hadn't thought about her in years, and the memories were hazy at best. But every detail mattered now. Emma took the lead in organizing the search. She contacted a private investigator, someone discreet but thorough, who could dig into the past without raising too many red flags. They provided him with all the information Michael could remember, hoping it would be enough to trace the woman's whereabouts and uncover what had happened after their relationship ended. Meanwhile, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Liam. She found herself returning to the orphanage, under the pretense of continuing her charitable work, but in reality, she just wanted to see the boy who had so suddenly and irrevocably entered her life. Each time she saw him, playing quietly by himself or interacting with the other children, her heart ached. There was a bond forming, a connection she couldn't explain but felt deep within her. One afternoon, as she watched Liam from a distance, Mrs. Anderson approached her. "You've taken quite an interest in young Liam," the older woman remarked, her tone kind but curious. Emma turned to her, nodding slightly. "There's something about him. I can't put my finger on it, but I feel drawn to him." Mrs. Anderson smiled gently. "He's a special boy. Very quiet, very thoughtful. He doesn't speak much about his past. Not that he knows much to say, but he has a deep sadness in him. It's as if he knows, somehow, that he's missing something, someone." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. Has he ever mentioned his mother? Or anything about where he came from? Mrs. Anderson shook her head. "Not really. All we know is what was in the file when he was brought here, that he was left at the hospital shortly after birth, and the woman who left him never returned. We don't even know her name." Emma's heart sank. So many questions with so few answers. But as she looked at Liam, she knew they couldn't give up. "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. You've been so kind. I want to help him in any way I can." The older woman placed a reassuring hand on Emma's arm. "I can see that, dear, and I believe you will." Back at home, Emma shared what she had learned with Michael. The news that there was no record of Liam's mother or any clue as to her identity only deepened their resolve. The private investigator was their best hope now. Days turned into weeks, and the waiting became increasingly difficult. Every time the phone rang, Emma's heart would skip a beat, hoping it was the investigator with some breakthrough. But each time, the answer was the same. "I'm still looking, but nothing yet." The uncertainty gnawed at both of them. Michael, who had always been so sure of his path in life, now found himself questioning everything. Every night, he lay awake, his mind plagued by thoughts of Liam and the life he never knew existed. Then, finally, the call came. It was late in the evening, and Emma and Michael were sitting in the living room, the tension between them thick and unspoken. The phone's ring shattered the silence, and Emma nearly jumped out of her seat to answer it. "Hello?" Her voice was breathless, a mix of fear and anticipation. "Mrs. Wilson, it's Frank," the private investigator said on the other end of the line. "I found something." Emma's heart raced. "What is it? Did you find her?" "I traced the woman Michael described. Her name was Sarah Whitaker. She lived in a small town in Pennsylvania. But there's something you need to know." Michael, who had been listening closely, leaned in, his face pale. Emma swallowed hard. "What is it, Frank?" What did you find out? There was a pause on the other end, and then Frank spoke again, his voice low and serious. Sarah passed away about 5 years ago. It looks like she was battling a severe illness for a long time. She died in a small hospice facility, alone. Emma felt a wave of sadness wash over her. And Liam? From what I can gather, she had no family left. No one to take care of the boy. It appears that after she passed, Liam was placed in the system. That's how he ended up in the orphanage. Michael's head dropped into his hands, the weight of the news too much to bear. So she never told anyone. She never reached out. Emma's voice trembled as she asked the question that had been on her mind from the beginning. Frank, is there any indication that she knew who Michael was? That she wanted to find him? Frank hesitated before answering. There's nothing in the records that directly points to that. But there are some letters in her personal effects. I haven't read them all yet, but they might give us more insight. Emma thanked him, hanging up the phone, her mind swirling with emotions. Michael sat in silence, his face a mask of grief and regret. The knowledge that Liam's mother had died alone, possibly without ever telling her son about his father, weighed heavily on him. What do we do now? Michael finally asked, his voice hoarse. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. We have to go through those letters, Michael. We need to know what she wanted, what she was thinking. And we need to decide what to do about Liam. Michael looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain. Emma, I can't believe this is happening. How do we even begin to make this right? Emma's resolve hardened. We start by bringing Liam home. He's your son, Michael, and he deserves to know that he has a father who cares about him. We can't change the past, but we can give him a future. The decision was made. Emma and Michael would bring Liam into their home, into their lives, and do everything in their power to make up for the years that had been lost. But as they prepared for the next steps, they knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, from integrating Liam into their family to confronting the emotional wounds that would undoubtedly surface. As they moved forward, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were only just beginning to uncover the full story of what had happened. And with each new piece of the puzzle, the stakes would only get higher. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Emma and Michael sat at the dining table, the untouched breakfast between them a stark reminder of the gravity of their situation. The night before had been sleepless, both of them lost in their thoughts about the revelation that had shattered their lives. But now, as they faced the day ahead, they knew they had to make a decision, one that would change their lives forever. Michael broke the silence first, his voice heavy with emotion. Emma, are we really ready for this? To bring Liam into our home? I'm terrified of how this will affect everything, but I can't bear the thought of him staying in that orphanage alone. Emma reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. I'm scared too, Michael, but he's your son, and he deserves to be with his family. We can't leave him there, knowing what we know. We have the resources, the love. We can give him a life he never had. Michael squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. But what if he resents us? What if he can't adjust? This is a huge change for him, for all of us. Emma's gaze softened. We'll take it one step at a time. He's been through so much already, but we'll do everything we can to make him feel safe and loved. We owe him that, Michael. The decision was clear. They would adopt Liam, bring him home, and make him a part of their family. But as the reality of that choice settled in, both Emma and Michael knew that this was only the beginning of a long and uncertain journey. That afternoon, they returned to the orphanage, hearts pounding with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Mrs. Anderson greeted them warmly, but there was a knowing look in her eyes, as if she sensed that today's visit was different. I have a feeling you're here for more than just a visit, Mrs. Anderson said gently, leading them to her office. Emma nodded, her heart racing. We've decided. We want to adopt Liam. Mrs. Anderson's eyes widened with surprise and then softened with understanding. I can't say I didn't see this coming. Liam has touched your hearts, hasn't he? Michael nodded, his voice quiet but firm. He has, and we want to bring him home, give him the family he deserves. Mrs. Anderson smiled, though there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. I'm happy to hear that. Liam is a wonderful boy, and he needs a stable, loving home. But you should know, It won't be easy. He's been through a lot, and it may take time for him to adjust, to trust. We understand, Emma replied, her voice steady. But we're committed to this. We want to give him the life he should have had from the beginning. Mrs. Anderson nodded, and after a brief discussion about the legal process, she led them to the playroom where Liam was. He was sitting by himself, as usual, quietly playing with a set of building blocks. Emma's heart ached at the sight of him, so small and alone, unaware of the life-changing news that was about to be shared. "Liam," Mrs. Anderson called softly, kneeling beside him. "There's something important we need to talk about." Liam looked up, his green eyes wide with curiosity, but tinged with the caution of a child who had learned not to expect too much from the world. Emma knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "Liam, do you remember me? I've been visiting you here for a little while now." Liam nodded silently, his gaze flickering between Emma and Michael. Emma took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Liam, how would you feel about coming to live with us? About having a home and a family?" Liam stared at her, processing her words. His small brow furrowed in confusion. "You want me to live with you?" Emma nodded, her heart breaking at the uncertainty in his voice. "Yes, Liam. We want you to be part of our family." Liam's gaze shifted to Michael, who had been quiet, watching the exchange. "You too?" the boy asked softly. Michael swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Liam. We want you to come home with us. We want to take care of you, be there for you." Liam didn't respond right away. He looked down at the blocks in his hands, his little face a mixture of hope and fear. Finally, he whispered, "What if I don't know how to be in a family?" Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. She gently placed her hand on his. "That's okay, Liam. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to worry about anything. We'll be there with you every step of the way." There was a long pause as Liam considered their words. Then, slowly, he nodded, a small, hesitant smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll go with you." The ride home was quiet, the air filled with a mixture of nervousness and cautious optimism. Liam sat in the back seat, clutching a small bag that Mrs. Anderson had packed for him, his eyes wide as he took in the unfamiliar sights. Emma kept glancing back at him, her heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness. She knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey for all of them, but for now, they were taking the first step. When they arrived at the house, Emma led Liam inside, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. Michael followed, carrying the few belongings Liam had brought with him. The house, once a place of comfort and routine, now felt like a new, uncharted territory. Emma showed Liam to his room, which they had quickly prepared with a few essentials. The walls were painted a soft blue, and there was a small bed with fresh sheets, a bookshelf with a few toys and books, and a window that let in the afternoon sunlight. "This is your room, Liam," Emma said softly. "You can make it your own, however you like. If there's anything you need or want, just tell us." Liam walked in slowly, looking around with wide eyes. He set his bag down on the bed and turned to Emma. "It's nice," he said quietly. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Thank you." Emma smiled, trying to hold back her emotions. "You're welcome, Liam. We're so glad you're here." As the day wore on, the reality of their new life began to settle in. There were moments of awkwardness as Liam adjusted to the unfamiliar environment and moments of tenderness as Michael and Emma did their best to make him feel at home. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, the silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Liam was quiet, still trying to understand this new world he had been thrust into. Emma and Michael exchanged glances, both of them aware of the challenges that lay ahead, but also filled with a sense of purpose. After dinner, Emma tucked Liam into bed, smoothing the blanket over him as he settled in. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Good night, Liam," she whispered. Liam looked up at her, his green eyes full of uncertainty, but also a flicker of trust. "Good night," he whispered back. As Emma left the room, closing the door softly behind her, she leaned against the wall, finally allowing herself to exhale. The day had been exhausting, emotionally and physically, but it was a start. She knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. In the quiet of the night, as Liam drifted off to sleep in his new bed, and Michael and Emma lay awake, their minds racing with the thoughts of the days to come, one thing was clear. They were now a family, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The first few weeks after bringing Liam home were a delicate balancing act for Emma and Michael. They knew they were embarking on a journey filled with unknowns, and the stakes had never been higher. Their lives had been turned upside down, but they were determined to make it work, for Liam and for themselves. Liam was quiet, as he had been at the orphanage, and seemed hesitant to fully settle into his new surroundings. He was polite and obedient, but there was a guardedness to him, a hesitation to fully trust or let his guard down. Emma and Michael were patient, giving him space while gently encouraging him to open up. At first, it was the little things that Emma noticed. Liam would sit quietly during meals, eating slowly and carefully, as if unsure whether he was really allowed to be there. He avoided eye contact, and when he did speak, it was in soft, brief responses. He didn't ask for anything, not even when he clearly needed something. The idea of asking seemed foreign to him. Emma's heart broke every time she saw the wariness in his eyes, the way he would flinch slightly when someone reached out to touch him, as if expecting to be hurt. She couldn't imagine the trauma he had endured in his young life, but she was determined to show him that this was different, that he was safe now. Michael struggled as well, his own feelings of guilt and inadequacy weighing heavily on him. He wanted to be the father Liam needed, but he was unsure how to bridge the gap between them. Every time he saw Liam, he was reminded of the years he had missed, the childhood memories that should have been his to share. He knew it wasn't his fault, but the guilt gnawed at him nonetheless. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Michael sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television. Emma joined him, sensing his inner turmoil. "You're doing fine, Michael," she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Emma. I feel like I'm failing him. I don't know how to reach him, how to make him feel like he belongs here." Emma squeezed his arm reassuringly. "It's going to take time. He's been through so much. We can't expect him to adjust overnight. But he'll come around, Michael. We just have to keep showing him that we're here for him, that he's part of this family." Michael nodded, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. "I just wish I knew how to be what he needs. I don't want him to feel like an outsider." "You're doing better than you think," Emma replied softly. "And he's noticing. He may not show it yet, but he is." As the days passed, Emma and Michael continued to find ways to connect with Liam. Emma spent hours with him, reading stories before bed, playing simple games, and encouraging him to express himself. Michael, who had always been passionate about sports, introduced Liam to soccer, hoping it would help them bond. At first, Liam was hesitant, unsure of himself and the unfamiliar activities. But slowly, he began to open up. One day, as Emma read him a bedtime story, Liam quietly asked if he could choose the next book. It was a small step, but to Emma, it was monumental. She handed him the stack of books, and he carefully selected one, his eyes shining with a flicker of excitement she hadn't seen before. Michael noticed similar progress during their soccer sessions. Liam, who had initially been reluctant to participate, began to show genuine interest. He started asking questions, watching Michael's movements closely, and mimicking them as best as he could. The first time Liam scored a goal, a shy smile spread across his face, and Michael felt a surge of pride that he hadn't expected. "Great job, buddy," Michael cheered, clapping his hands. "You're getting really good at this." Liam looked up at him, the smile still lingering on his lips. "Thanks," he mumbled, and for the first time, Michael saw a glimpse of the connection he had been longing for. But the progress was not without setbacks. There were moments when Liam would retreat into himself, his defenses going up at the slightest provocation. If Emma or Michael raised their voices, even in excitement or playfulness, Liam would flinch, his eyes wide with fear. If they asked him too many questions, he would shut down, his responses becoming curt and withdrawn. Emma and Michael quickly learned to be patient, to let Liam set the pace. They gave him space when he needed it and reassurance when he sought it. They also made a conscious effort to create a stable routine, knowing how important consistency was for a child who had known so little of it. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Emma found Liam sitting alone in his room, staring out the window. She knocked softly on the door before entering, not wanting to startle him. "Hey, Liam," she said softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Do you want to talk about anything?" Liam didn't respond at first. He continued to stare out the window, his small hands clenched in his lap. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke in a barely audible voice. "What if I'm not good at being part of a family?" Emma's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She reached out, gently taking his hand in hers. "Liam, being part of a family isn't about being good at it. It's about loving each other, supporting each other, no matter what. It's okay to feel scared or unsure. We're all learning together." Liam finally turned to look at her, his green eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if you and Michael don't like me? What if I'm not what you wanted?" Emma felt tears well up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, wanting to be strong for him. "Oh, Liam, we already love you just the way you are. You're exactly who we want in our family. We're not perfect either, but that's okay. We're going to figure this out together." Liam stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he could believe her. Then, slowly, he nodded, a small but significant gesture of trust. "Okay," he whispered. Emma pulled him into a gentle hug, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and sadness. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear. But in that moment, she also knew that they were making progress, one small step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Liam continued to adjust to his new life. He became more comfortable in the house, more willing to engage with Emma and Michael, and more open to the idea of being part of a family. There were still difficult days, but they were becoming less frequent, and the moments of connection were growing stronger. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Liam surprised them by asking a question that had clearly been on his mind for some time. "Can I call you Mom and Dad?" Emma and Michael exchanged a glance, both of them overwhelmed by the significance of his question. Michael leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Liam, we would be honored if you called us Mom and Dad." Liam smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up his face. "Okay, Mom, Dad." In that moment, Emma felt a wave of relief and happiness wash over her. The journey was far from over, but they had taken a huge step forward. They were becoming a family, not just in name, but in heart. That night, as Liam slept soundly in his bed, and Emma and Michael sat together in the quiet of their home, they knew that they had made the right choice. It hadn't been easy, and there were still many challenges ahead, but they were on this path together. And together, they would build the life and the family that Liam deserved. As the days continued to pass, the Wilson family began to settle into a new routine. Emma and Michael were finally starting to feel a sense of normalcy, a rhythm that included Liam as a cherished part of their lives. The transition had been challenging, but with every small victory, every smile, every hug, every shared laugh, they felt more like a true family. However, there was one aspect of their lives that still hung over them like a dark cloud: the unanswered questions about Liam's past. Though they had made progress in bonding with Liam, the mystery of his early years and the truth about his mother, Sarah Whitaker, remained unresolved. Emma knew that they couldn't move forward completely until they had all the answers. One afternoon, as Michael was at work and Liam was at school, Emma sat down with the letters that the private investigator had recovered from Sarah's belongings. She had been putting off reading them, unsure of what she might find, but she knew it was time. She needed to understand Sarah's story, not only for her own peace of mind, but for Liam's as well. With trembling hands, Emma opened the first letter. The handwriting was delicate, almost fragile, as if written by someone who had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Dear Michael, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if I'll ever have the courage to send it, but there are things I need to say, things you deserve to know." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Sarah had intended to reach out to Michael, to tell him about Liam, but something had stopped her. Emma continued reading, her heart heavy with every word. "I never meant for things to end this way. When we were together, I didn't realize how much our time would mean to me. But life took us in different directions, And by the time I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, Michael. Scared that you wouldn't want this. Scared that I couldn't do it on my own." Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read on, the pain in Sarah's words palpable. "I tried to find you, but you had already moved on, built a life without me. I didn't want to disrupt that, to burden you with something you hadn't asked for. So I made the decision to raise Liam on my own. I thought I could do it, but things didn't go as planned. I became ill, and my world started to fall apart. I wanted to tell you, Michael, to ask for your help, but by then, it felt too late. I didn't want you to feel obligated or resentful. So I made a choice that I'm not sure was the right one. I left Liam at the hospital, hoping that someone kind would take him in, that he would have a better life than I could give him. But it broke my heart, Michael. I thought about him every day, wondered if I had made the worst mistake of my life." The letter ended abruptly, as if Sarah had run out of the strength to continue. Emma sat back, her mind reeling from what she had just read. Sarah had wanted to reach out, to tell Michael the truth, but she had been overwhelmed by fear and doubt. And in the end, she had made a choice that had haunted her until the day she died. Emma spent the rest of the afternoon going through the other letters, piecing together the fragments of Sarah's life. There were letters to Liam, ones that he would never read, in which Sarah expressed her love for him, her regret for not being able to be the mother he deserved. In each letter, there was a sense of desperation, of a woman who had been backed into a corner by circumstances beyond her control. By the time Emma finished, she was emotionally drained, her heart heavy with the burden of Sarah's story. She knew she had to share this with Michael, and eventually, with Liam. But how could she break this to them? How could she tell Michael that the woman he had known had wanted to reach out, but had felt too overwhelmed to do so? And how could she tell Liam that his mother had loved him deeply, but had been forced to give him up because she thought it was the only way to protect him? That evening, Emma waited until Liam was asleep before sitting down with Michael in the living room. She handed him the letters without saying a word, her eyes filled with the weight of what she had read. Michael took the letters, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. As he began to read, Emma watched as the emotions played across his face. Disbelief, sadness, anger, and finally, a deep, aching sorrow. By the time he finished, his hands were trembling, and his eyes were glazed with unshed tears. "She wanted to tell me," Michael said in a choked whisper. "She was scared, and I never knew." Emma nodded, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "She loved him, Michael. She wanted to do what was best for him, even if it meant breaking her own heart." Michael shook his head, his voice thick with regret. "If I had known, if she had just reached out, I could have helped. I could have been there for both of them." "You couldn't have known," Emma said gently. "She made a choice, and it's clear that it was incredibly difficult for her. But now we have to focus on Liam. He deserves to know the truth, even if it's painful." Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with anguish. "How do we tell him, Emma? How do we tell him that his mother loved him, but felt she had no choice but to leave him?" "We'll do it together," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the tears she felt building up. "And we'll be there for him, every step of the way." The next day, Emma and Michael prepared themselves to have the most difficult conversation of their lives. They waited until after dinner, when Liam was settled in the living room with his favorite book. Emma sat down beside him, and Michael took a seat across from them, his expression solemn. "Liam," Emma began softly, "we need to talk to you about something important. Something about your mom." Liam's head snapped up, his green eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "My mom?" Michael nodded, taking a deep breath. "We found some letters that your mom wrote, letters that she never got to send. We want to share them with you because we think it's important that you know how much she loved you." Liam's hands tightened around his book, his knuckles turning white. What did she say?" Emma reached out and gently took the book from his hands, setting it aside. "She told us about how much she wanted to take care of you, but she got sick, and things became very difficult for her. She didn't want to leave you, Liam, but she thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Tears welled up in Liam's eyes as he processed her words. "She didn't leave because she didn't want me?" "No, sweetheart," Emma said, her voice breaking. "She left because she loved you so much that she wanted you to have a better life. She thought that by leaving you, you would be taken care of. But it hurt her very much to do it." Michael leaned in, his voice trembling with emotion. "Your mom loved you, Liam, and she wanted you to know that. We have her letters, and you can read them whenever you're ready. But just know that she never stopped loving you." Liam's tears spilled over, and he leaned into Emma, his small body shaking with sobs. Emma held him close, her own tears falling as she rocked him gently. Michael reached out and placed a hand on Liam's back, his heart breaking for the son he was only just beginning to know. That night, as Liam cried himself to sleep in Emma's arms, the weight of his mother's love and sacrifice settled into the hearts of the Wilson family. The pain was palpable, but there was also a sense of closure, of understanding that had been missing before. As Emma and Michael sat together in the quiet of their home, they knew that the road ahead would still be difficult. But they also knew that they had taken a crucial step in helping Liam come to terms with his past. They would continue to support him, to love him, and to be the family he needed, even as they continued to uncover the complexities of his past. And with each passing day, they would move closer to healing, closer to becoming the family they were meant to be. In the weeks following the difficult conversation about his mother, Liam began to change. At first, it was subtle, a lingering sadness in his eyes, a quietness that seemed deeper than before. Emma and Michael noticed these shifts, concerned about how he was processing the painful truth they had revealed to him. They knew this was part of the healing process, but it didn't make it any easier to watch. Liam, who had slowly been opening up to them, started retreating back into himself. He became more withdrawn, spending hours alone in his room or sitting quietly by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. The connection they had been building with him seemed to waver, and Emma feared that he was slipping away. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed early, Emma and Michael sat down together in the kitchen, the weight of their worries pressing heavily on them. "Michael, I'm so scared," Emma admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I feel like we're losing him. He was starting to trust us, and now, it's like he's shutting down." Michael rubbed his temples, his face lined with worry. "I know, Emma. I've noticed it too. But what can we do? We had to tell him the truth. He deserved to know." Emma nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Of course he did. But I don't know how to help him through this. I keep thinking, maybe we should have waited. Maybe he wasn't ready." Michael reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We did what we thought was best. We can't second-guess ourselves now. What we need to do is be here for him. Let him know we're not going anywhere." The days that followed were difficult. Liam's behavior became more erratic, his emotions unpredictable. Some days, he was quiet and withdrawn, barely speaking a word. Other days, he was angry, lashing out at Emma and Michael over the smallest things. He refused to talk about his mother, and when Emma gently suggested reading the letters together, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Emma and Michael were at a loss. They tried everything they could think of to reach him, to show him that they were there for him no matter what. But Liam seemed determined to push them away, as if testing how far he could go before they gave up on him. One particularly rough day, Liam had a meltdown at school. His teacher called Emma, concerned and unsure of how to handle the situation. Liam had gotten into an argument with another child and ended up throwing his lunch tray across the cafeteria, shouting that he didn't care about anything or anyone. Emma rushed to the school, her heart pounding with fear and worry. When she arrived, she found Liam sitting alone in the principal's office, his face flushed with anger and tears. He looked so small, so lost, that it broke her heart all over again. "Liam," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "What happened?" Liam didn't answer. He stared down at his hands, his body tense with anger and frustration. Emma took a deep breath, trying to keep her own emotions in check. "I know you're hurting, sweetheart, but we can't help you if you won't talk to us." Liam finally looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. "Why did she leave me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Why didn't she come back for me?" Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, but she forced herself to stay strong. "I don't know, Liam. I wish I had all the answers for you, but I don't. What I do know is that she loved you very much, and she wanted you to be safe. She thought she was doing the right thing. She didn't want me, Liam said bitterly, his voice trembling. She didn't care. That's not true, Emma said, her voice firm but gentle. She did care, Liam. She cared so much that it hurt her to leave you. But she was sick, and she thought that leaving you was the only way to keep you safe. She made a mistake, but it wasn't because she didn't love you. Liam shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I don't believe that. If she really loved me, she wouldn't have left. Emma's heart broke at his words, knowing that nothing she said could take away his pain. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as he sobbed against her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Liam, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. But you're not alone now. You have me, and you have Michael. We're here for you, and we're not going anywhere. The drive home was silent. Liam sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his expression distant. Emma's mind raced, trying to figure out how to help him. She knew they needed to do something different, something more, to support him through this. When they got home, Michael was waiting for them, his face etched with concern. Emma pulled him aside and told him what had happened, her voice shaking with the weight of her emotions. Michael, we need help, she said, her voice trembling. We can't do this on our own. Liam needs more than what we're giving him. He needs someone who can help him process all of this. Michael nodded, his expression grim. You're right. I've been thinking the same thing. We need to find someone who specializes in trauma, someone who can help him work through everything he's feeling. The next day, Emma made a series of phone calls, seeking out a therapist who could help Liam. She wanted someone who was experienced with children who had been through trauma, someone who could build a rapport with Liam and help him navigate the complex emotions he was dealing with. After several conversations and careful consideration, Emma and Michael decided on a therapist named Dr. Harper, who came highly recommended. Dr. Harper specialized in working with children who had experienced loss and abandonment, and she had a reputation for being kind, patient, and effective. The first session was difficult. Liam was reluctant, refusing to speak or engage. He sat with his arms crossed, staring at the floor, while Dr. Harper gently tried to draw him out. But Dr. Harper was patient, and over time, she began to earn Liam's trust. She used creative methods, like art and play, to help him express what he was feeling when words were too difficult. As the sessions continued, there were small breakthroughs. Liam started to open up, sharing bits and pieces of his thoughts and fears. Dr. Harper helped him understand that his mother's decision to leave him wasn't a reflection of his worth, but rather a reflection of her own struggles. She helped him see that it was okay to feel angry and sad, but that those feelings didn't mean he wasn't loved or wanted. At home, Emma and Michael noticed a gradual change in Liam. He began to talk more, to ask questions, and to engage with them in ways he hadn't before. He still had moments of sadness and anger, but they were becoming less frequent, and when they did happen, he was more willing to let them in, to let them help. One evening, after a particularly good day, Liam surprised Emma by asking to read one of his mother's letters together. It was a small step, but to Emma, it felt like a giant leap. She sat with him on the couch, holding the letter as he read, his voice soft but steady. As they read together, Liam leaned against her, his small body warm and solid. Emma felt a surge of love and protectiveness wash over her. They still had a long way to go, but in that moment, she knew that they were on the right path. Michael joined them, sitting on the other side of Liam, and together they read the words that Sarah had written, words filled with love and regret, but also with hope. For the first time, Liam seemed to understand that his mother had loved him, even if she hadn't been able to stay. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that he could be loved again. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Liam and his new parents grew stronger. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and fear, but there was also progress. Liam began to laugh more, to play more, and to let Emma and Michael into his world. He started to believe that he could be part of a family, that he was wanted, that he was loved. One night, after tucking Liam into bed, Michael and Emma sat together in the quiet of their home, reflecting on how far they had come. The journey had been harder than they had ever imagined, but it had also brought them closer together. They had learned to lean on each other, to support each other, and to find strength in their love for Liam. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Michael asked, his voice soft but filled with hope. Emma nodded, smiling as she reached for his hand. "Yes, we are. We've been through so much, but we're stronger for it. And Liam, he's going to be okay too. We'll make sure of it." As they sat together in the darkness, they knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but they were ready to face them as a family. And for the first time since this journey began, they felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they were exactly where they were meant to be. As time went on, the Wilson family found a rhythm that felt more and more like home. Liam's therapy sessions with Dr. Harper were making a profound difference. He was learning to navigate his emotions and understand that his past didn't define his future. With each session, he grew more comfortable in his new life, more confident that he belonged with Emma and Michael. The walls that Liam had built around his heart were slowly coming down. He started to express himself more freely, sharing his thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. He laughed more, smiled more, and the shadows that had once clouded his eyes were beginning to lift. Emma and Michael watched these changes with a mixture of relief and joy, grateful that the boy who had come into their lives so broken was beginning to heal. One Saturday morning, as the first hints of autumn began to color the leaves outside, Emma and Michael decided to take Liam on a trip to the countryside. They had rented a small cabin near a lake, hoping to spend the weekend away from the stresses of daily life and focus on simply being together as a family. The drive out to the cabin was peaceful. Liam sat in the back seat, gazing out at the passing scenery with a look of quiet contentment. The tension that had once been a constant presence in the car rides was gone, replaced by an easy companionship. Emma and Michael exchanged smiles, both of them silently acknowledging how far they had come. When they arrived at the cabin, Liam's eyes lit up at the sight of the lake shimmering in the sunlight. "Can we go fishing?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. Michael grinned, ruffling Liam's hair. "Absolutely. We've got everything we need right here." The weekend was everything they had hoped it would be. They spent their days exploring the woods, fishing by the lake, and roasting marshmallows by the fire at night. Liam's laughter echoed through the trees, a sound that filled Emma and Michael's hearts with a warmth they had longed for. It was as if, for the first time, they were experiencing the simple joys of family life without the weight of the past bearing down on them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water, they sat together on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in blankets to ward off the chill. Liam leaned against Emma, his head resting on her shoulder, while Michael sat beside them, his arm draped protectively around them both. "Tell me a story," Liam said softly, his voice tinged with the drowsiness that comes from a day well spent. Emma smiled, kissing the top of his head. "What kind of story?" "A happy one," Liam murmured, his eyes half closed. Michael chuckled softly. "I think we can manage that. How about the story of how we all met?" Liam looked up at him, his eyes wide with interest. "Really? But I already know that story." "Maybe," Emma said with a smile, "but we can tell it again, just the way you like it." And so they did. Emma and Michael took turns recounting the events that had brought them together, from Emma's first visit to the orphanage to the day they brought Liam home. They left out the darker parts, focusing instead on the moments of connection, the kindnesses that had slowly built the bridge between them. As they spoke, Liam's eyes grew heavier, and soon he was fast asleep, his small body nestled against Emma's side. Michael smiled at the sight, his heart swelling with love for the boy who had changed their lives so completely. "He's happy," Michael said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. "He's finally happy." Emma nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "He is. And so are we." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. It was a moment of pure peace, the kind that they had all been searching for since the day Liam had come into their lives. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. But peace, as they would soon learn, can be fragile. The next morning, as they packed up to head home, Emma noticed that Liam was quieter than usual. He seemed distracted, his thoughts elsewhere, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was bothering him. She mentioned it to Michael, who agreed that Liam seemed off, but they decided not to press him, hoping that he would open up when he was ready. The drive back to the city was uneventful, but the sense of unease lingered. Liam remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, his expression unreadable. Emma tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were short and distracted. When they arrived home, Liam went straight to his room without a word. Emma and Michael exchanged worried glances, both of them sensing that something was wrong but unsure how to approach it. They decided to give him some space, hoping that he would come to them when he was ready to talk. But as the days passed, Liam's behavior grew more erratic. He became increasingly withdrawn, refusing to participate in activities that he had once enjoyed. He spent long hours alone in his room, barely speaking to Emma and Michael, and when he did, his words were laced with a sharpness that hadn't been there before. Emma's concern deepened. She could see the walls going up again, the same walls they had worked so hard to bring down. She tried to reach out to him, to comfort him, but he pushed her away, insisting that he was fine and didn't want to talk about it. Michael, too, was at a loss. He had seen Liam go through difficult phases before, but this felt different. There was a distance in Liam's eyes, a coldness that hadn't been there before. It was as if something had shifted inside him, something dark and heavy that he was struggling to carry on his own. One evening, after another failed attempt to get through to Liam, Emma and Michael sat down to talk about what to do next. The stress was taking a toll on both of them, and they knew they couldn't keep going like this without finding a way to help their son. "We need to talk to Dr. Harper," Emma said, her voice tinged with desperation. "Something's wrong, Michael. I can feel it. He's shutting us out again, and I don't know why." Michael nodded, his jaw tight with worry. "I agree. Maybe Dr. Harper can help us figure out what's going on. He was doing so well, and now, it's like we're losing him all over again." Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to give in to despair. "We can't lose him, Michael. We've come too far. We need to do whatever it takes to help him." The next day, they arranged a meeting with Dr. Harper. They explained what had been happening, describing the sudden change in Liam's behavior and their growing concern. Dr. Harper listened carefully, her expression thoughtful as she took in their words. "Liam has been through a lot," Dr. Harper said finally, her tone measured. "It's not uncommon for children who have experienced trauma to go through phases of progress and regression. The fact that he was doing well and then suddenly withdrew suggests that something may have triggered these feelings. We need to explore what that might be. Do you think it could be something we did?" Emma asked, her voice trembling with guilt. "Something we said?" Dr. Harper shook her head gently. "It's not necessarily about something you did or said. Sometimes, a memory or a feeling can be triggered by something seemingly small, something that brings up unresolved emotions. It could be related to his mother, to his past, or even to the fear of losing the stability he's found with you." Emma and Michael exchanged worried glances, both of them realizing how complex the situation truly was. They had thought they were past the worst of it, but now it seemed that the past was still very much a part of their present. "What do we do?" Michael asked, his voice filled with concern. "How do we help him?" Dr. Harper leaned forward, her gaze steady. "We continue to support him, to reassure him that he's safe and loved. We'll need to be patient, to let him come to terms with whatever he's feeling in his own time. And I'd like to increase the frequency of our sessions, to give him more opportunities to work through these emotions." Emma nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We'll do whatever it takes. We just want him to be okay." As they left Dr. Harper's office, Emma and Michael felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. They knew they were facing another uphill battle, but they were determined to see it through. They couldn't lose Liam, not after everything they had been through together. That night, as they tucked Liam into bed, Emma sat beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. He seemed calmer, but the sadness in his eyes was still there, just beneath the surface. "Good night, Liam," Emma whispered, leaning down to kiss his forehead. Liam looked up at her, his voice barely audible. "Good night, Mom." As Emma left the room, closing the door softly behind her, she felt a knot of worry tighten in her chest. The storm wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. And as the Wilson family braced themselves for what was to come, they held on to the one thing that had kept them together through it all: love. The days following their meeting with Dr. Harper were some of the most challenging the Wilson family had faced. Liam's behavior remained unpredictable, swinging between quiet withdrawal and bursts of anger that left Emma and Michael feeling helpless. Despite their best efforts, it seemed that every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. Emma found herself lying awake at night, replaying conversations in her head, wondering what they could have done differently. Michael, too, was weighed down by a constant sense of unease, his thoughts always circling back to Liam and the fear that they might not be able to reach him this time. But they didn't give up. They continued to support Liam in every way they could, showing him with their actions that they weren't going anywhere, no matter how difficult things became. They increased his therapy sessions with Dr. Harper, hoping that the additional support would help him work through whatever was troubling him. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session, Dr. Harper pulled Emma aside. Liam had barely spoken during the session, and when he did, his words were laced with anger and frustration. Emma could see the concern in Dr. Harper's eyes as she began to speak. "Emma, I think we're dealing with something deeper here," Dr. Harper said gently. "Liam is struggling with a lot of complex emotions, and I believe there's a fear at the root of all this, a fear of losing the stability he's found with you and Michael." Emma's heart sank. "What can we do? How do we help him understand that we're not going to leave him?" Dr. Harper's expression softened. "It's going to take time and patience. Liam needs to hear, over and over again, that he's safe with you, that he's loved. But more than that, he needs to see it, in your actions, in the consistency of your presence. It's a process and it won't happen overnight, but with time, I believe he'll start to believe it." Emma took Dr. Harper's words to heart. She and Michael made a concerted effort to reinforce their love for Liam in every possible way. They spent more time with him, engaged him in activities he enjoyed, and made sure he knew that he could come to them with anything, no matter how big or small. They also worked to keep their own emotions in check, knowing that their calm and steady presence was crucial to helping Liam feel secure. But despite their efforts, Liam's behavior continued to be erratic. He pushed them away one moment and clung to them the next, as if testing their limits, seeing how much they could take before they would give up on him. Emma and Michael weathered each storm, reminding themselves that this was part of the process, that Liam was trying to protect himself in the only way he knew how. Then, one evening, everything came to a head. It had been a long day, filled with tension that neither Emma nor Michael could quite put their finger on. Liam had been particularly quiet, his mood dark and brooding, and by the time dinner rolled around, the atmosphere in the house was heavy with unspoken emotions. As they sat down to eat, Liam suddenly erupted in anger, pushing his plate away and shouting that he didn't want to eat, that he didn't want to be there. His outburst caught Emma and Michael off guard, and for a moment, they simply stared at him, unsure of how to respond. "Liam, it's okay," Emma said softly, reaching out to him. "You don't have to eat if you're not hungry. But talk to us. Tell us what's going on." Liam glared at her, his green eyes filled with pain and frustration. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like. You say you love me, but what if you change your mind? What if you leave like she did?" The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She had known this fear was lurking beneath the surface, but hearing it spoken out loud was devastating. She felt tears spring to her eyes, but she blinked them back, knowing she needed to stay strong for Liam. Michael, who had been silent up until now, leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Liam, listen to me. We're not going anywhere. We love you, and nothing is going to change that. I know you're scared and I understand why, but we're here for you, no matter what." Liam shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "You don't know that. You can't promise that. What if you get tired of me? What if I'm too much?" Emma's heart broke at his words, and she moved to sit beside him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Liam, you're not too much. You're never too much. We're your family, and families stick together, no matter how hard things get. We chose you, Liam, and we're choosing you every day. That's not going to change." For a moment, Liam resisted, his body stiff with anger and fear. But then, as if a dam had broken, he collapsed against her, his small frame shaking with sobs. Emma held him close, rocking him gently as he cried, murmuring reassurances in his ear. Michael joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, forming a protective cocoon around their son. It felt like hours before Liam's sobs began to subside, but eventually, he quieted, his breathing evening out as the exhaustion from his emotional release took over. Emma and Michael stayed with him, not saying a word, just holding him close and letting him know that they were there. Finally, Liam pulled back slightly, looking up at them with tear-streaked cheeks and red-rimmed eyes. "You really mean it?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "You're not going to leave?" Michael cupped Liam's face in his hands, his voice filled with love and sincerity. "We mean it, Liam. We're not going anywhere. We're in this together, and nothing you do or say is going to change that. We love you, and we're here to stay." Emma nodded, brushing a strand of hair away from Liam's forehead. "You're stuck with us, kiddo," she said with a soft smile. "We're not letting you go." Liam looked at both of them, his eyes searching their faces for any hint of doubt, any sign that they might not be telling the truth. But all he saw was love and unwavering commitment, and slowly, tentatively, he began to believe them. In the days that followed, there was a noticeable shift in Liam's behavior. The anger and defiance that had marked his interactions with Emma and Michael began to fade, replaced by a tentative openness that had been missing before. He still had moments of doubt, still struggled with the fear of abandonment that had been ingrained in him for so long, but he was more willing to let Emma and Michael in, to trust that they weren't going to leave him. Emma and Michael continued to reinforce their love and commitment to Liam in every way they could. They made a point of spending quality time together as a family, creating new memories that helped build a sense of security and belonging. They also encouraged Liam to express his feelings, reminding him that it was okay to be scared or sad, but that he didn't have to face those feelings alone. And as the weeks turned into months, the bond between them grew stronger. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and fear, but there was also a growing sense of trust and connection. Liam began to believe that he was truly part of a family, that he was loved for who he was, not in spite of his past, but because of everything that had brought him to this point. One evening, as they were sitting together on the couch, watching a movie, Liam suddenly turned to Emma and Michael, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I'm glad you found me," he said simply, his eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and love. Emma felt tears well up in her eyes as she smiled at him, her heart swelling with pride and joy. "We're glad we found you too, Liam. You've made our lives so much better." Michael nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We love you, buddy, more than anything." Liam smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up his face, and in that moment, Emma knew that they had finally turned a corner. They had faced the storm and come out the other side stronger, closer, and more united than ever before. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but they were ready to face them together as a family. And for the first time, Liam truly believed that he was exactly where he was meant to be, loved, safe, and home.